I think everybody can hear us and see us now. Everyone, I'm so sorry for that. We were all backstage talking and we didn't hit the link to go into the webinar. So we'll talk about technical, Zoom coaching at the end of this. But we're going to dive right in since we're a couple minutes late and we've had lots of people waiting for us. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And I'm just going to go back to go forward so that we know where we're at and where we're going. So as I mentioned, this is going to be a luncheon to be able to how we overthrow performance reviews as we know them and to really make feedback actionable for all of your employees. We get all this feedback during performance reviews. What do we do with it? How do we drive it into personalized learning that attaches to their goals and their roles and it brings to life the upskilling that's applicable and relatable to what they do and why. So it's a little bit about me. I'm CEO of SkillCycle. And before becoming CEO of SkillCycle, I'm actually a former HR professional that worked in lots of enterprise, mid-markets, and startup companies. I created SkillCycle because I want to create an entire ecosystem where we could bring performance development, talent development, and learning development together all in one ecosystem. So as you're going through performance, you can take that feedback and make it actionable through personalized learning that's applicable and relatable to what people are doing. You're driving engagement surveys, you can make that feedback actionable as to how it's related to their goals and their roles and what they need to do in order to progress and to be able to succeed. So I am joined here by two amazing guests. We got Maya Haradat, who is actually one of our first coaches with SkillCycle. And not only is she a coach, she's an amazing trainer. And she has worked with many groups, including Con Edison and Ogilvy, and she received the New York City Small Business Award for Entrepreneurial Innovation. So not only is Maya a senior practitioner of HR, she's a coach, but she's also an entrepreneur herself, who has done many things to be able to help people unlock and unblock, where they're at and to get to where they need to go. She's also the Vice President of College Relations for the New York chapter, the National Board of African American HR Professionals. And she really specializes in tackling the big question marks in life to get to the answers that you need now. So welcome, Maya. We're thrilled to have you here.
Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to this conversation with everyone here today.
Great. Awesome. And now we got Monty. Monty is an amazing HR professional, and he's been at it for a long time. He really looks at all investments in people drive revenue, which is the way we need to be looking not only in HR, but also as to all of our employees, is that when you unlock and unblock them and drive that development and that skilling that they need, you're actually going to generate money and not lose money. I know we're so fear-based where we look at learning and development as, a cost. It is not. It's a revenue driver. And Monty is an author and 2X TED speaker. He's been featured in a ton of magazines from Inc. to Entrepreneur, The Business Insider, American Express, and more. It's amazing. And he knows his purpose in life is to add value to others. And he consistently tries to transform people. So Monty is definitely like my people. This is, HR. What are we here for? And it's here to empower people and make them their best selves by driving, development and engagement for everybody. So thrilled to have you here, Monty.
Thank you.
Awesome. So our agenda, we're going to talk about how we got here, like, the current state of performance reviews and what's working and what's not working. And some of the costs and inefficiencies with it, especially when it's not tied to anything. And then how can we fix it? We're here to be able to drive the proof in the pudding with what we need to do right now, and having Maya's perspective, especially as a coach, and having Monty's point of view, especially as a very progressive HR leader, is going to be actually critical, because it's how you drive that engagement between the human components and how you enable that through technology and people development. And then we're going to talk about practical next steps as to what you guys can do to build a success towards your company. So how did we get here, right? This was my pain point in HR. So many tools and systems, no visibility, whether I have 100 employees or 1,000 employees. We're doing performance management. Why? We're running engagement surveys. Why? How does it connect to learning and development? Drove me bonkers, right? It's probably one of the reasons I left HR after 20 years. But I still got people like Monty who get it. So what do you think, Monty, as we look at, what the current state is and how we're trying to progress based on your experiences and your stories and how you progressed? I'd love to hear, your thoughts around this.
I think that the the tools, that one of the biggest challenges is that nothing talks to one another, right? Like the systems don't talk, but more importantly, I don't think that when we're rolling out these bigger plans at organizations, so performance management, learning and development, things like that, I don't believe that we're properly framing it for the organization, right? There's so many organizations make sure when they roll these things out, they allow the organization and the people in the organization to think that performance management and learning and development is only important as it relates to compensation, as it relates to them getting that next title, right? Mm-hmm. So the driver behind it isn't necessarily about them leading themselves at a higher level or getting the tool or getting the skills that they need in order to progress in their careers. That kind of longer term view, oftentimes it's just the shorter term view of, oh, we're only doing this performance management thing or the learning development thing because I want to get that next role or I want to get a bump in compensation. So I think that there's this idea where if we can reframe the conversation a bit and let the teammates know and understand that if you do these things and performance management is part of your overall career growth and development, and it's not just about a title or money, that, it would help bridge this gap a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm sure you hear this too, Maya, like as you're working with individuals, like what are your thoughts and what do you hear and how do you navigate that?
Totally. So Monty, I love that you made the connection of performance management as being viewed only for compensation, because I know as a coach, and I'm sure my fellow coaches have seen this as well, what happens is now people start flooding my inbox with wanting to work with me, which of course, here for it, I'd be able to support and help them. But then the conversation is solely focused around, well, I want to get that next title and I want to get that compensation. And what happens for people where that's not their goal, that's not their driver, they're actually there to learn, they're actually there to figure out what their career path is going to look like. And they want something that they actually like the job that they have. They're not necessarily looking to move into a new role. They want to deepen that work. A lot of those individuals, their voice gets unheard. They're not sure how to communicate their goals, their vision of what they want to do. And then the work of the company just becomes really focused around this next level, and not deepening the current skills of a lot of people. So I've heard this a number of times from different groups of individuals. I hear the fear and the panic around this time of year where, can you help me think out my evaluation? Like, what am I going to write down? And it's from I don't know, it's not from a space where you feel confident that what you're bringing to the table is going to be valued at the company. It's just this very singular focus of, well, how do I do this so that I'm going to make sure I'm in line for the next promotion? And I think we're losing a lot of opportunities for employees to be able to develop, and then, which of course brings more to the bottom line for everybody.
Right. It's always been about like what you get as opposed to how to get it. Right.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, because I remember like the first time that being junior in my career, I'm just like, I was an analyst at one point. I wanted to get to that, overall, HR manager. And I remember like I had a good manager that gave me feedback, but what drove me bonkers about it was, one, I was getting it for the first time this year. And I remember saying to the manager, why did you tell me that like months ago? That I needed to work on all these different elements. And then two, what he did present me was these are your competencies here for an analyst that I'm over succeeding on. But these are like the competencies that you need to get to be, actual HR manager that we need to work on. And it was when we start to peel back the layers of the onion, like, all right, in order for me to be able to hit these critical milestones, I actually need to not just do these things, but like how I do them, how I learn, how I progress, what I mean?
Right.
And to be able to navigate that. Because I also think it's like, that's where you start to feel confidence, right? When instead of just being thrown in and getting the money, you're actually building to be able to not only take that money, but feel good about what you're doing as you're, engaging and building your own career lattice.
Yeah, 100%. I think to add to that point, I think there's something around gauging the willingness of the teammates, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
And when you talk about it's how you do it, I think there's a piece of the conversation that is also around what are you willing to do? Like what type of work are you willing to do? Because and I think this is where the coaching comes in specifically,
Sure.
because
Yeah.
there's this external journey of your career and the money and the compensation, but then there is the what are the real internal blocks that are there that are
Totally.
prohibiting you from actually getting that external success that you want. And there's this idea that I always say that business relationships and personal relationships like operate on the same principles. What yields success in one yields success in the other because people drive both, right?
Yeah.
And oftentimes when somebody has an opportunity in their personal life that ends up rearing its head in their work life and vice versa, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's also a conversation to be had somewhere around the willingness to do the deep internal work in order to get that those external results, which is where I think coaching comes in and plays a huge factor.
Yeah, and
Definitely.
it kind of hits on what I just brought up here. There's going to be a lot of things to automate, but you know, I mean, how do you automate your own personal development and having that human connection, right? Because it's what are we really saving time for, right?
Mhm.
Are we saving time on things that we don't want to do, but are we also burning time on not being able to get to the things that we aspire to be and what that takes from that overall human connection and to drive that, you know, efficiency, you know, I mean, not only for yourself, but for the organization. And so I guess like, you know, how do you guys feel about it? Like, you know, like you see everything being automated within HR and like, especially when it comes to the human component of performance management and coaching. Tell me what comes to top of mind and what you think we need to do now with your expertise.
I have no problem with automation as long as we understand that the idea of connecting as humans and creating that human connection is the one piece that we will never be able to automate, right? You can't automate the human connection. So I believe that if you leverage AI the right way, it can actually create more time for you to create those deeper connections and those deeper relationships with your teammates, which will then foster a safe enough space for you to really get to start to develop and coach them. So yeah.
Yeah. And you know, with your coaching people, like I'm sure they're coming to you left and right with this too, like how's this going to impact me and my job and performance management and yeah. So what are your thoughts?
Well, and I think so. A couple of things that I think come up in this with, you know, specifically around automation. I agree with you, Monty. I think that I think automation can actually be used as a superpower to help us do the work, like to actually have the time to think through things about the learning and development part of the conversation. So for example, I've had conversations a number of times with first-time managers that are like really nervous about how to handle performance management. Well, what if we actually built in a conversation that instead of it just being like, hey, you just have to look back at the end of the year at how your people did, what if we built in time intentionally throughout the year to give them the coaching, to give them the support around how to be able to give feedback on an ongoing basis? Now, if there's something that can help them automate either part of their job or part of that conversation, I'm here for 1,000%. But a lot of times I think we're seeing automation in a way that it can actually serve some of these opportunities. I mean, I've worked with clients, with coaching clients, where when we have the opportunity for them to sit down and talk, and to what you were describing earlier, Monty, where we actually get to talk about those areas that they're concerned about and be able to break them apart and pull them apart and really have a very honest conversation. Sometimes people don't have the information or knowledge to know how to do some of the tasks. So I think that's a very big one to be able to dive into. And then the other part of it is you need the support so that as you start doing it and you make a mistake, you have support, have a safe space, right? To be able to come to and kind of talk through, well, how can I do that better? What happens is that then you spend a lot less time getting people to take ownership, because they want to take ownership. They want to do it for themselves. They want to engage, rather than it always being this reactive position that they're in and not being able to kind of, for them to drive the conversation and for them to see themselves in a different place. So I'm here for the automation, because I think that if we put a different hat on this, I think it'll give people really the time to work on that learning and growth part of their career.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. And it's really about like, costs too. If you're not getting that human and that learning and development, and you're not really driving the engagement that you have. I was speaking with a manager the other day, and managers really get boxed in here too. So it's not just HR professionals who are feeling constantly behind the curve as to what's going on in performance management and how to enact that feedback, with actual personalized learning. It's the managers, what I mean, who are, getting boxed in because like they're stepping into a zone where they don't have all the expertise to manage, and yet they're managing people that are looking to yield the results from, what they're doing. And then we just get into this cycle where it because that transition is poorly managed, and it's of no fault, but it's again that preparation component that's not happening, and the fact that skilling is just seen as more as once in time, just like performance management, instead of it being evergreen. We're losing all this money and these people. And so when you think about this, like Monte, I love from your experience, like, I mean, because you work for Schumacher and they've been around for a little bit. How have you really transcended, like, I mean, as to how they get ahead and doing what you're doing with your people and be able to change that mindset?
So we look at, it's interesting, right? We look at performance management a little different than most organizations. We look at it as a partnership between the leader and the teammate, right? And I know that may sound a little weird, but I'll give it to you, right? The reason why we see it that way is because we don't take a top-down approach to leadership. Like in many organizations, the leader is at the top, right? And everybody else is below. But here we kind of take that model and we flip it on its side, right? So that we see leadership horizontally, so that nobody is higher or lower, nobody is better or worse. We just have certain people that are further along in their journey than other people, right? And what that creates is it creates this model where the goal of the leader now is not to necessarily direct or manage or tell what to do, but now it is to partner with the teammate to help them reach whatever destination they want to reach in their journey with the help of the leader, right? And this model for us works so well because it allows us to invest more deeper in our people and more efficiently in our people. And there's a bigger ROI for that investment over time. Right?
Yeah.
It makes the teammate take more ownership over their individual journeys, because now they are a partner and they're not necessarily looking up, but they're looking out, right? And it makes it so that they take more ownership, and it positions them where they can outline what they need from their leader, not just what their leader needs from them.
Yeah.
And that piece makes it so that the teammate can be a more active participant in their own growth and development. Does that make sense?
Totally makes sense. And it seems like a lot of work, but I'm pretty sure Skill Cycle, this is where tech enablement really comes in, right?
Like 100%, because where Skill Cycle helps us the most is because Skill Cycle is an external partner that reflects our internal values and our internal approach, right? Which is huge. Because of the efficiency of the platform, they empower the teammates by giving them the option to choose the coach, to choose the approach that's best works for them, right? They empower the leader by creating a model where they're also an active part of the process. So it's not just a one-way street, but the leader is also part of this coaching process, but within the confines of the coaching model, that's what makes it unique, right? Because the Skill Cycle is able to create a safe enough space, not just for the teammate, but for the leader as well, through the technology and the efficiency of the platform. And that's what creates this like effortless synergy that benefits everybody involved, right? And I can tell you from like personal experience, since we've been using Skill Cycle here, we started with our sales organization. And since we've been using Skill Cycle, we've seen an uptick in revenue, which is always good, right? But when you look, But when you look into the driver behind that, the reason why we've seen an uptick in revenue is because Skill Cycle has helped us to develop better leaders. Our leaders are more poised, one. they're more confident, 2, and they're better equipped with the tools and resources to lead themselves at a higher level, right?
Right.
Because they're leading themselves at a higher level, that is what permeates throughout their teams and throughout the organizations. So it's like a, rising tide raises all boats.
Right.
And the leader is just leading themselves at such a high level that the teams benefit from it and the organization benefits from it.
No, I mean, that's awesome. I mean, and you're really nailing the remix there, right? Because like, and you probably know this, you know what I mean? Performance management becomes such a fear-based process.
Yes. Totally.
Fear, right? And,
Totally.
and it's always like right after the new year and before the holidays at the end of the year, right? So like
Exactly.
people are already, we really didn't work out the timing well on that. And I think, and Maya, I would love your feedback, especially,
Sure.
as you're working with coaches, like it's, you guys have both said the empowerment. There's no more fear. It's about meeting people we're at in the empowerment. And so would love to hear your feedback on that and how you see the transition and how you've been working with individuals to get rid of this fear and see it as a potential motivator to be able to get to the next place.
Totally. So Monty, it was fascinating hearing your example from the CHRO level, because I've actually experienced working with clients as a coach that they're working in organizations where their leaders have that vision about what management can look like, right? Where there's an opportunity to kind of be able to use the inputs to be able to support the learning conversation. So let me give you an example of this. There was a coaching client that I worked with very recently where she sat down with her manager. She outlined some of the goals that she wanted to be able to achieve in her career. And then from those goals, we were able to build out within our coaching conversations very clear points of being able to measure what was going on. And what blew me away, I wasn't expecting it, we weren't even putting this in as an input, was that she actually saw several of her team members during the time frame that we were working together get promoted. And for her, the biggest thing about the promotion that she and I talked about quite a bit, it wasn't just that they got promoted. We're excited about that. We want more money. We want more, all of those things. But she said that she was spending less time having to manage the team because they were taking ownership. And
Yeah.
I can directly trace back to some of the early conversations where we were talking about that tough, rough spot she had of delegation and what that looks like for her and how to be able to break that out and break that apart for her team, because they have very different styles than she has. How do we do that? And so for myself, it was actually very fascinating to be able to outline what her goals were. She came already kind of with the blessing of her manager on how to be able to do this, but the question was how, right? How are we going to do this? And we got to spend time thinking, talking through and working through the priorities around it, so that when she goes back into the work that she's doing right now, I mean, the numbers prove it. They're there, and there's such a huge benefit because this is an employee now that is super engaged. She wants to do more. She wants to see more and then also her team in the process have benefited. Right. I mean, when you talk about the numbers from that last slide, Christy, you see that effect happening when people are able to take time out to kind of work on this, and right. The company itself sees the vision of where this can go.
Yeah, that's a big number, 35 mil, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
it's
and
huge.
Speaking of numbers too, I mean, Monty, I love your feedback on this, because like you've had this experience too, being former HR practitioner. We have the most employees, same amount of employees as the CEO, but we're always fighting and getting the least amount of budget until we shift that mentality to show them the money. So Monty, walk us through. How did you show people the money?
So I think it was a matter of showing them. So it's more of a holistic perspective, right? And it's making the investment in the people that we have so that we don't have to continuously go out to market. Right. And it's about creating this idea of let's continue to invest. Let's continue to build out a model where we're creating not just better employees, right? It's past that we're creating better humans, and we're creating better humans by helping them to realize their potential. We're creating better humans by helping them to see that they can accomplish more than they ever believed, and shift them out of that fear-based model, right? Mm-hmm. But in order to do that, I love what you said earlier when we were backstage. It's about making sure that you have that that you have the mindset of your CEO, and that as the head of HR, that you are a reflection of that. So many conversations on the back end, making sure that I understand what we want to accomplish as an organization long term, not just for the next year, but like for the next 5 to 10 years. What do we want to accomplish as an organization? What are we willing to invest in order to get there? And how much time are we willing to allow that investment to mature?
Yeah. Yeah. And what do you think, like, Maya, within your experience too, especially as you're probably working with leaders, like what are the things like that they don't see? Because I always find it amazing. Like, I don't know how this is going to help me. And I think it's because a lot of times we've made learning and development so crunchy granola, so munchy. It's just like, all right, what's in it for me? What does this mean for me and why? And it's one of the biggest connectors that we're trying to drive it, within Skill Cycle. It's what's in it for me, and this is how it's going to help you. So talk to me about like, what you've seen and what you've heard, and how you're making that connection for people.
Sure. So I think there's a couple of things that come to mind in that area. And I think the biggest one of all is the amount of hours that you decrease stressing out over something, because that's a reality. If you don't have the support and the tools there, the employee is going to stress out. They're not going to say that out loud, and you probably can't measure that. But when you're looking at, hey, why aren't we doing X, Y, and Z? The reality is because the people don't have the support and the tools to figure it out. So I have had a number of coaching conversations with people where they say, I've cleared everything off because I need to give my attention to this because this is such a pressing matter. Like that employee that is, doing their first time performance reviews, or if they're still working in a very reactive performance review system and they want more, and they're trying to figure out, how do I rate my self-review in a way that's going to be effective to get me the next bonus or the next title. When you have the opportunity to have conversations that are learning and development based, when I'm just not trying to help them fill out the bullets on their spreadsheet, but we can actually be honest and say, okay, so the last time we looked at your 360, these were some of the areas that stood out that your team said, or that we saw like consistent themes of areas for growth and improvement. Let's take a moment and step back and pull back from the urgency of that moment. And let's see how we can deepen this one area. Are there some tools that are already in the Skill Cycle library of resources you can relate to? A lot of times there are. And then how does that connect to you? And I think that's the big opportunity as a coach, is that I can help people connect the dots for themselves rather than sitting there and spiraling and stressing out, because people are going to do it anyhow. And so if you don't provide them with that space to be able to echo their thoughts and not be worried about, this is going to now show up in this way negatively on my review, I think it has this very interesting holistic effect that, just talking informally with other coaches, people that are working with coaches, they're seeing the benefits, right? Like we may not necessarily control the budget, so I can't speak to that effect, but we're seeing the benefits where people are less stressed, lower sick days. I've never been able to formally measure that, but I see that firsthand. Where I start working with clients and they're like taking a ton of sick days, and I'll leave that alone, but sick days. And then now they're not. Like, that's a measurement. That's a measurement. You're getting people genuinely engaging, genuinely showing up, being productive, and they're not spiraling on something, and instead being able to really invest their strengths into moving the organization forward. So for me, there's a number of ways I think you can probably measure this.
Yeah. And I think, we're able to show that impact with the platform, but like, I also bring it back to like my own personal experience. Right. And like, again, going through like my first, performance review, right? I'm getting feedback for the first time. And shockingly enough, the feedback was, you're too blunt, right? You need to work on your communication skills, right? Shocking. And okay, I have to work on this right now. So I'm like Googling blunt communication skills, right? You know what I mean? And, even if I were ChatGPT it right now, you just get this whole candy box stuff, right? It's like, which one do I choose? How does this relate to where I need to show up at work? How does it relate with how I communicate from one person to how I communicate with another person? So like, I got feedback, which is good. Now I don't know what to do with it. And now I'm stressed. And then, oh, by the way, there's this, generic communication training course that, I have to attend, and I sit in there and only like one thing resonates with me. And then next thing I know, in another performance cycle, and I haven't figured out how to figure out my communication skills, right? Cause like, I think that this is like, I didn't feel empowered. Like I felt like I was just going through the motions and then once again, creating that fear based. And I think, where it really started to resonate with me, especially is that when I did have a leader, you know what I mean? And, giving me the feedback and they brought in a coach to work with me, it was like peeling back the layers of the onion. Okay. Yes, you are blunt, but Christy, it's also thinking, situationally, knowing your audience, right?
Mhm.
How you're depicting yourself. What is it that you're trying to get across? Are you listening? As opposed to just talking. So like all these little things start to come up. And like, being blunt, like as far as communications wasn't, it was, how it was all getting jumbled together. But when you start to peel the layers of the onion, I had so much development in so many core areas as to how I was showing up and working with individuals that I, really start to progress with. And it definitely has helped in certain areas. and I want to say, but it's evergreen. I mean, this is something that I've been working and developing now, Christ, 20 years, right? And it's like, and it's something that like we need to look at it. Like when we really look at learning as a point in time, it's just going to create disengagement and more problems across the way. And it's kind of like, why we are in the state of where we are right now, where people are feeling burned out, where they don't feel empowered. And not to mention all the difficulties going outside of the workforce and just at home for individuals. And so,
Totally.
so yeah, that's my little, I just want to come in as like, the actual learner experience, but I think that this is helpful. Monty, tell me a success story, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like you've been at this for a while, and like, since you look at performance management different and, we'd love to be able to understand, like the success story and the why behind it. And especially from a learner's perspective, from what you've seen and heard and what you've been able to do to enable people to be able to do what they need to do.
Yeah, I think it starts with the conversation with the C-suite, and I want to bring up a point when it's how to start this conversation. I think there's a piece of it the piece of the conversation has to be, do we recognize that we have to invest in our people? Step one. Many leaders will go, absolutely, we know we have to invest in our people, right? But then the next piece of it is being honest enough with yourself in the organization to say, have we put our current leaders in the position to have enough time to make that investment? And if we haven't, and many times we haven't, right? Then question mark, who's going to do it? And I think that's where the company like Skill Cycle comes in. That's how it worked for us. Right? Because it was we recognize that this still needs to happen. Our leaders don't have time to do it. They have directly expressed they don't have time to do it. And now we need somebody who has the skill set and the time to be able to dedicate to our people in a way that not that necessarily we always can't, but that we don't have the time to do it. Right. And I think that's where the conversation starts. And for me, the success story is when I got to F. Schumacher, the idea was I started with working with the customer experience team and kind of coaching them and mentoring them and getting them to a place. But it got there because it was, well, what are the current pain points? What are we going through right now? So I spoke to all of the team members and we got the current pain points and we kind of put them all out there. And then I presented this idea of this huge strategy plan to say, here's where we are, here's what we're going to focus on, and here's what the future looks like. And specifically, now that we know what the future looks like, what are you willing to do in order to get there? Do you want to be part of this journey? And we created that opt-in moment. And the opt-in moment is so important because nobody likes to be told what to do. Right? Nobody likes to be told what to do. So when you say, listen, we want to strive for success, we want to take this to a different level, and we so want you to come on this journey with us. But if you don't want to come on this journey, we totally understand it. That's your choice, right? And by creating that opt-in moment, thankfully, everybody wanted to come on the journey. And now we have full buy-in, and now everybody's aligned. And
Right.
now, and when we had the buy-in and when we were totally aligned, now we were able to go on the journey, going back to what I was saying early, as partners. So now we're walking this journey together. And that's what created the improved ROI, literally in terms of revenue. That's what created the higher employee engagement. That's what created happier teammates. So much so that the idea of coaching and developing was something that teams started to send throughout the organization. And then we start to get pings that say, hey, what about this coaching program that I hear about? Are we going to have access to it too? Because we hear about the benefits that it has for other people.
Yeah. It's like rapid fire. I mean, and it's how you're mixing up, right? Because you said this earlier, Monty. This is not top down, right? You're really building this up, and it drives that empowerment, and it becomes more of a workflow and an ecosystem rather than a checklist. You know what I mean? Which I think is like really relevant. Like I remember, the 20 years of my career, like, like these are the questions, like these are the things that we did that thought was performance management and the things that we need to do. But like that's the way we're looking at as things to do rather than things that we need to tie into the evolution and the growth of the organization and where they need to go, right? And like, one was like, the horrible spreadsheet. It's like, all right, we all know nobody's going to retain or remember what that was last year. What even was worse with the 9-box, right? Like, oh my God, it's just like, it's just like talk about like, how you're driving exclusion with the 9-box, like, you know what I mean? Because like, it's really about meeting people and including them as to where they are in their journey instead of, don't box them out. It's how you be able to bring them in. And so another archaic process. And then, oh my God, I think at one organization, I think I had 7 systems to manage, like between like just this performance management process, never mind my day-to-day, right? And that was just, it disconnected all the data, and it was just driving me nuts because like, even with we get so much good feedback out of performance management, and then we're not driving the what's next, right? And it's because of the limitations with, the way that we're thinking about it, but it's also the limitations like, around the tech. But I'll never forget, like, early in my career, and I was at Fidelity Investments, like, as a junior HR person, we had thousands of employees, and we went through this, like, our performance system, and I remember this was done. I'm like, what's next? And it was like, oh, we'll do some trainings and we'll get back to it next year. And I was like, this took so much time. And like, we got so much feedback, and like, we just gave people report cards, and we're not going to have them like, get the learning that they need. Now we all see why I got in trouble in HR, being that blunt, like, communicate. Like it took like, this was like 6 months of my life. And like, it's just like, all right, see you next time. And so like, I think that this is like the remix that we got to look at, right? That this is all about change and evolution and what we're doing. And is it truly working to set you and your organization up for success? So Monty, what you said, what's your current state, right? And then how we're able to drive it to the future, I think is critical. And I think Maya, like, like you see this, like, when people like are going through this, like, where have you seen people gain the true benefit? And then where have you seen people get lost, and why? And does it mimic some of these things?
Totally. So, I mean, when you said the 9-box grid, I did have a cringe moment. I won't lie. I've definitely had those conversations as a coach. Your example that you gave earlier, Christy, if I can, I think is a perfect example where you're given this blanket answer of you need to work on improving this, right? And it's this broad thing like communication or how you're managing your team or your teamwork, or whatever the case may be. And the real question is, well, what does that actually mean? How does that show up on my day-to-day? How does that actually show up with my like, how does that show up in a way that I can take action on? So I think sometimes that the conversations that I'm having, especially around performance management, people are trying to give, quality feedback. I think people are trying to do the right thing about giving the feedback. But then when you receive the feedback, well, what am I really supposed to do with this? And how do I take action to really work on this particular thing? I think that's one of the struggles I hear very commonly from people, especially if, and I think this is a big one for those that identify with the theme of making sure that we have an inclusive work environment, especially if you think differently, especially if you operate or work differently. And, that's a whole conversation all within itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the best way to support those employees is to actually not necessarily give them the same blanket answer that you would give to everyone else. It's to make sure that everyone has that opportunity to break down, what does that mean for me? How does that look a month from now, 3 months from now, 6 months from now? If I'm working on my communication skills of not being blunt, to your exact point, maybe there's some areas where actually that's a great thing. Because I personally think as a leader, that's a great thing because you're direct when you need to be in those conversations. But maybe we take 1 or 2 areas, we'll work with the coach on those 1 or 2 areas. And then by being able to be focused, to be targeted, to start measuring things where you've got the support of the coach to around it to measure things. You don't have to be all things to all people. I don't think we can.
Mhm.
We're humans, right? We need to
Yeah.
focus in on our strengths. So instead of then being scared about doing this performance review and like, I have to cover all things. No, just start in on a few areas, make some serious progress on those few areas. And I've seen it time and time again. Those are the employees that then are really much more engaged. They're, joining different groups within the company, supporting and helping out other teams in different ways. They're the ones that are now getting promoted without that, that singular focus rather on just getting promoted, right? Like it's
Right.
naturally happening.
Right.
Because they're seeing themselves show up and grow in this environment that invests in them, right? That's what you want to feel. That's why people
Right.
leave their companies is they don't feel that they're being invested in,
Yeah.
and the more you're able to do that, and I think the coaching part gives people an opportunity to be able to just focus on something. And to what you said, Monty, like you're not trying to be all things to all people and tackle everything, right? But we have an opportunity to sit down and focus and get very clear feedback so that now, 3 months from now, you can measure progress in a
Yeah.
very specific, tangible way.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's just, I think you said it perfectly there, like very specific and tangible, right? Way, because like, one, it took the fear out. Like once I started to peel back the layers of the onion and working with the coach, right? And I think the other thing is too, is that like, even going back to like the 9 boxes of like rear box, like we only put a handful of people in an organization on a 9 box. What about everybody else? Because a couple of people are not going to, lift your organization to where it needs to be. And so it's again, it's just like, when you're really giving opportunity and driving that empowerment and the what's in it for me for the masses, you have the opportunity and the integrity and, the ability and the agility to get to the mass goals that everybody needs to be able to participate in.
Mhm.
All right. Well, we're coming up on our last 10 minutes. I do want to squeeze in some time for questions, but just to really, recap this, it really start to evaluate. And I know many of you are probably going through it right now, but you have a great opportunity going into the new year, you know what I mean, as to what your performance management system and process is doing, is not doing. And I think the big core components is, is it a people enablement tool? Does it lead to like the insights for people to make feedback actionable? Do you have data all in one place so you're not playing, pivot table, wizards, you know what I mean, in the wee hours of the night? Does it offer that long-term development and not just a short-term stint? And I think that that's extremely important because if you want to drive engagement and you want to retain people, this is more than a couple months thing. This should be a long-term thing. And then, the biggest thing is it connected to people's goals? They used to drive me nuts, right? So even going back to like the feedback component, like, okay, you need to be a better communicator. I'm looking at my goal list and I'm like, all right, I'm not going to make these goals unless I communicate better. But again, I still couldn't make that connection, how this was tying to everybody. And I think that that's, when we're driving that what's in a me factor and that applicability and relatability to where I am right now and what I need to do and to be able to drive that level of competency in the next steps is very important. But for all the attendees that come here, we'll send out the checklist because this checklist is actually a really good audit form for you guys to start to be able to prepare and have those conversations internally as to what your current state is, what you're really doing, what are you really trying to get out of it, and can you see the results in the organization, especially for the positive. And I think that that's imperative. And I know that the other big thing here that again, we'll be sending out materials on this. This is a whole change management process. Learning is all about change. It's all about evolution. It's not just about climbing a ladder as to where you need to go and why. It's really looking at it across the board and how you enact that change for the better of the masses and not for the few. And so this is a very easy change management, guide as far as like, how you assess the need for change, or really remixing your performance management process, what's working, what's not working, and where you want to get to. and then defining, and by bringing in managers and leaders to help you define, what the tone that you're trying to set, the culture that you're trying to build, similar to what Monty has done, right? Monty could not do this on his own, and then being able to set those change outcomes, and then what that means as far as communication, what that means as far as rollout and actual implementation, and then most importantly, how to sustain that change. And this is the evergreen, ever learning, ever performance philosophy that we really want to be able to get into, that I think is key and critical. It's not about a checklist. It's about a workflow that should continually be happening if we're giving feedback continuously. All right. So we're getting to the tail end. I just want to thank everybody and apologize for the, technical difficulty. But any last words, Maya and Monty, as to like, when you think about this remix and you think about the opportunities here and what you're doing and why you're doing, what would you say that be able to tie this out?
So, I will say that, from coming from the coach's perspective, I think the opportunity to really transform performance management, where it is a proactive opportunity, where it's connected to your goals, where you have someone supporting you and helping you kind of figure out, where do I focus my attention right here, right now? I've seen the benefits a number of times. I've seen employees really go from, being, I'm kind of sort of here, to like really now wanting to take ownership over their work. I've definitely seen them have the tangible benefits where it's showing up in their team and it's showing up, their managers are complimenting them and things of that nature. So, does it take work to do this? Of course it does, right? Anything that's worth having, it's going to take work. It's going to take time. But I think it's one of those investments that if you're willing to make those investments, I mean, this tool here, I think is a perfect example of that. If you're willing to make those investments, I think the growth that you wind up having, then it's going to happen on multiple levels. It's not just this, like, we're able to make more money. We're able to make more money. We have less sick days. We have more engaged people. People have their, their career path and their personalized learning journey developed for them, and they're excited about this. It gets me excited because it doesn't have to be a linear conversation. I think it could be something that really people want to come to the company because they feel they belong. They feel like that they're being heard, at this particular company. So that matters.
Yeah.
And from an HR perspective, I would say two things. One, first, never underestimate the value of human connectivity, right? Because the value of human connectivity, before being a teammate or an employee, we are humans first. And it is very important for all organizations to deal with the human side of the teammate and not just the employee side of the teammate. And what that means is make sure that you're creating a safe enough space for that employee to actually engage with you as a leader and the organization, and make sure that the employee understands that you want what's best for them long-term that benefits the organization, and not that you want what's best for the organization that may benefit them. So there's a bit of a remix to how you look at it, right? I think the second piece of it is understand that it is a continuous journey, and that this is not a one conversation thing or something that happens once or twice a year, that there's this idea of continuous feedback, continuous innovation, continuous improvement. And that happens, week in and week out. And this is where I think coaching specifically, skill cycle specifically, comes into play, because if you're one of the organizations like many that don't have the infrastructure to do it week in and week out, or day in and day out, you can then choose a partner like Skill Cycle that can say, hey, we can support you in those gaps that you have, so that your people are still getting that continuous journey day in and day out, week in and week out, with the coaches and the platform and the resources that can facilitate them to be better people, better partners, and better for the organization.
Yeah. No, awesome. And well said. And thank you. Well, this is coming to the conclusion of our presentation. So we have a couple of gifts for you. So, for all those that attended and, waited for us as we, got our logistics right on Zoom, the white paper is going to be published. That goes through a lot of these step-by-steps, that Maya and Monty went through, as to, understanding where you're at, what that checklist is, what you can do now to really remix it and make it a win-win, where everybody is empowered to really be able to drive their own personal development that really gets the company driving that engagement, driving that productivity, driving that inclusion, and everything in between. So big thing, that's going to get sent out soon is that white paper along with this presentation. And then I cannot thank Maya and Monty enough, not only for their expertise, but for their dedication. And when I say dedication, I'm speaking to all my HR practitioners and coaches out there. Our role is to enable people, and it's people like Maya and Monty that continue to thrive and to make people successful and be able to enable them to be their best. And these are the visions for, what we all need to aspire and B2B. And I know it's tough, and a lot of it comes from learning and development, but I just can't thank you guys enough from the bottom of my heart. Thank you so much for your time. And I hope everybody out there learned a ton.
Thank you.
Thank you so
All
much.
right. Well, Maya and Monty, I'll see you backstage. Just hit that button since we got it wrong the first time. And for everybody else out there, if you want more information about us, we're at skillcycle.com. Thank you and have a great day.